Before we bring back Juba, Sara, would you like to make some remarks?
Sorry, very short remarks. Just Alistair has actually preempted some of the points I was going to make in terms of reflecting on some of the wider challenges. You know, our speakers have highlighted quite well some of the very real problems that South Sudan already faces. I mean, South Sudan is a context of, long-standing and accelerating challenges, especially on the humanitarian side. And we've heard, about the austerity, we've heard about Jonglei, we've heard about the border. But I'd like to just emphasize two or three that for me are, even perhaps more pressing or less discussed. But also reflect on how, as an international community, we engage in responding to these challenges. Luca, you have spoken a lot about, the border, and particularly on the border crisis on the Abyei side, but we've talked a bit less about the border crisis on the South Kordofan Blue Nile side. And obviously, what it means for South Sudan is, already a presence of more than 100,000 refugees, which, poses very immense challenges in terms of assistance for these refugees, within Unity State in particular. And this is just now, currently. But obviously, going forward, what we know is that with the rainy season and, the hunger gap setting in, the number of refugees can, only increase, and especially if no modality to provide assistance within the SPLM North-controlled areas of South Kordofan is agreed. So that's something to bear in mind, because obviously it also poses, very immediate challenges for the population in Unity States, because the refugees camps are very close to the border, very close to the areas where there is fighting, and so they pose an immediate threat also in terms of security for the local South Sudanese population. You've already talked about the issue of the returnees and the agreement that has been initialed yesterday. However, I do remain concerned about the implementation of the agreement, and at the moment it's just an initial agreement. But the challenges are very immediate, and they're real. There is more than 500,000 people that are supposed to return to South Sudan, that perhaps don't want to return to South Sudan, would like to stay in the north. And whilst in the agreement there is discussion of the four freedoms you mentioned, Luca, the documents that these people will require to be able to make sure that they can make use of the agreement are still lacking. I mean, many of these people we're talking about are people that do not have any form of ID of documentation other as Sudanese citizens, but even as South Sudanese citizens, because a lot of the documentation that is supposed to be offered to them is obviously just being sort of figuring out how to ensure that you can. Oh, we've lost the connection. Okay. Sorry, I'll just wait for Juba to come.
We do this every morning in the BBC African service and with our colleagues in Africa, and it always falls a bit apart, I'm afraid. I'm amazed it's lasted
exactly,
this
it's lasted an hour.
I mean, to be honest, it might be a point, you might as well continue, because
Okay.
we don't know when they'll rejoin us.
Fine. I'll carry on. But so what I was getting to was obviously the risk of statelessness for so many people currently in Sudan in a limbo, because there is no clarity on why they would not be considered Sudanese citizens, and they should be considered South Sudanese citizens. It's just simply on the basis of ethnicity, and how is their legal status going to be determined. But it's something that obviously be interesting to discuss further in the second part of the meeting. William, you've hinted to the food security crisis, but just to give some figures, WFP is talking about 4.7 million people at risk of food insecurity in South Sudan. That's 1 million more than it was last year. And they're also talking about 1 million people being severely food insecure. So it's an immediate sort of, again, risk of a situation that has been obviously in place for a long time, degenerating very quickly, especially in northern Bahr el Ghazal. And then the issue we have not touched on, I think it's also important to reflect upon, is the spiraling of violence in so many areas of South Sudan, including in the urban areas, in Juba itself, but also in other towns, the extent of the lawlessness of many areas of South Sudan, and particularly Juba town. And, I just came back from Juba as well 2 weeks ago. I was really struck by the mounting level of xenophobia in Juba, especially towards, nationals of neighboring countries. I mean, that's something that really, should make us reflect on, what's happening in the society in South Sudan, the tensions that are obviously very real, what he says about where the different communities are in South Sudan. In terms of the international engagement, I'll leave the political and peacekeeping engagement perhaps for Alistair's reflection if he ever comes back. Otherwise, I can talk about that too. But I'd like to focus more on how we address these humanitarian challenges and the whole, debate between, humanitarian and development assistance in South Sudan. This is a donkey we've been kicking for the last 6 years. There's obviously, been a lot of focus on supporting, the transitions in South Sudan, supporting the development transition. We've discussed a lot, including here at ODI and including in a meeting with Luca Byong-Deng about 3 years ago, the whole, how fit for purpose the aid architecture really has been in South Sudan. And clearly, the evaluation, the very comprehensive evaluation that was carried out last year concluded that it is not fit for purpose at all. And this is really a moment to apply some of the lessons we have learned, over the last 5-6 years, and really rethink, as many donors sort of think about how to reorganize, their strategies, redevelop their strategies of assistance to South Sudan, how we can make sure that they are, better tailored, and that we move away from the one strategy for South Sudan, because it's not a context where just one, assistance strategies can be developed or applied. It's all the evaluations and analyses that we've read over the last 5-6 years continue to emphasize the need to tailor it to the context, to make sure that we take the context as the starting point to develop the assistance strategies. Well, this is a very, varied, multiform context where you need a multiplicity of different strategies to address the very many challenges that South Sudan offers. So there'll be areas where you can continue to support the government, to progress towards taking full responsibility for delivering services to its citizens. There are other areas where clearly this is premature, where the government still struggles to have, legitimacy on the ground and be present on the ground, and where, maintaining a very strong humanitarian response capacity is essential. And so we really need to make sure that we nuance the way in which, the mechanisms to provide assistance to the citizens of South Sudan are developed, tailored in the different states, depending to the different situation on the ground. And we can, reflect more in the Q&A perhaps on how this could be put in place. But I say that strongly because obviously in 2005, 2006, a lot of this humanitarian response capacity was progressively dismantled, or, very much sort of, made minimal. And clearly, we are in a situation where it's important that it is as strong as it could ever be to help South Sudan, the South Sudanese government, address the needs of its citizens.
Well, thank you very much for that.